In this how-to video, we're going to be looking at how to integrate Redgate's SQL Prompt with SQL Server Management Studio so that we get all the best features of both. So to get started, we're going to need to make a query, so I'm going to connect to the local database on this machine. And I'm going to be using this database, CTE Ranking Partitioning. That's one of the databases from one of the modules in the SQL course, and I'm using it because there's a couple of tables in it I want to use for the example queries I'm going to be using in this screencast. The employees table and the shifts table, and those have a foreign key relationship between them. Now, if you notice right here, this is the icon for IntelliSense. I have IntelliSense disabled right now. The default configuration of IntelliSense interferes with SQL Prompt, so I have it turned off. We're going to, in a little bit here, see how to configure IntelliSense so that we can get the features from IntelliSense we want turned on, but turn off the ones that will interfere with SQL Prompt. And then SQL Prompt is configured off of this menu selection here. I can go to SQL Prompt Options, and there's a whole bunch of things I can do, but this is where you enable and disable SQL Prompt. And here you can see I have it enabled right now, so we're ready to go and start writing queries. Well, I want to do a select against that employees table. So I'm going to type S, and notice what it does, what SQL Prompt does for me. It starts showing me keywords and database names that might be useful at this particular point. And once I get all the way down to SEL, it shows me, well, the only thing I can think of that might be useful here is select, at which point I can type either a carriage return, which won't actually do a return, or I can do a tab and complete that for me. Then the next thing I can do after I do a space, SQL Prompt says, well, you're doing a select. These are things you could type here, and it's basically listing all the columns that it sees and all the tables, because it doesn't know what I'm writing a query against yet. And if I want to go and filter it down, I can filter down the suggestions to say, gee, all I want to see are the functions I could put right here. And this is a function that happens to be in the CTE ranking and partitioning database. But let's go back to all of them. If you can also use this in the same way that you would probably use IntelliSense by typing the table name of the column you want to work with and end up putting a two-part name in. So I can type E, and notice it's starting to put the focus on the first E in that list, and the first EM in the list, and the first EMP in the list, you know, the usual sort of drill you see with this kind of stuff. And now I have EMPL, and I'm going to do a two-part name. So what I would like to do here is type dot and then put the column name. And I'm going to do that. It's not going to work. And you're going to see it's just going to put the dot. And the reason for that is, by default, SQL Prompt does not do completion on a dot. That's a bit different than IntelliSense. But we can configure SQL Prompt so that it works the same way as IntelliSense with respect to those completion characters. Down here you'll see insertion keys. What keys do you want to kick off insertion? And usually what I do is I pick the dot and the comma so that I can go and move between columns when I'm doing things. So this is going to make the completion stuff in SQL Prompt work a lot more like it does in IntelliSense in SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so now I have things set up the way I want. I can type EMPL like this, employees dot. And now what it's done is it's pushed all of the column names that are in the employees table to the top of this list. And then all the other stuff comes after it. And we'll get to these later. These are snippets, but we'll get to that a little bit later in the talk. And of course, I still have the same kind of filtering stuff. I can type F, because what I want to do is put the first name in, and then comma, then employee. Use like this dot. I want to put the last name in like this, for example, comma, EMPL, dot, and then I want to put the shift number in like this. And so then I can type, I just typed a carriage return, you carriage return or shift to do completion, besides the other characters we saw, the dot and that sort of thing. And now I can say I want to select this from the employees table, and of course, no big surprise here. That pops right up. Another thing that's a little bit different from IntelliSense is, in IntelliSense, if I wanted to, I could type a semicolon right here. The semicolon is the ending character on statements in SQL. Now, you don't absolutely have to use it, but that's the new syntax, and you should. But I can't, and there's no way for me to tell SQL Prompt to go and complete on a semicolon. So I'm going to hit the Tab key and hit my semicolon like this. So that's pretty nice. However, there's one thing that's missing here. Notice, and let me just go and introduce an error here, just spuriously. So I'll call this the employee table. And of course, that's wrong because there isn't any employee table in this database to start with, and it's actually supposed to match up with that one. If I was using IntelliSense, in fact, let me go and turn this on. If I was using IntelliSense, that would be highlighted with a red dot. But I can't quite do that, and the reason, I'll show you why I can't. Let me turn IntelliSense off just for half a second here, and let me fix up this query because I don't like to leave errors hanging around like so. Come back here. I'm going to turn on IntelliSense and do what I was just doing. So I'm going to do SEL like so, and then I'll do my tab, spacebar, EMP, employee, dot, and notice what happened. That extra employees came up. That was IntelliSense interfering with the things I was doing. So I don't want it to do that. So let me go and get rid of that line, like so. And let's go over and configure IntelliSense. And the way that you go and do this is to go down to Tools, Options, and go down into the Transact SQL Editor. And notice here, this is saying turn off IntelliSense by default, which means when you open a new window, it won't turn on IntelliSense. That's why the window I opened didn't have it. But I'm going to say, no, it's okay to turn on IntelliSense. And then I'm going to turn off statement completion. So now what I do is I have IntelliSense turned on, so I'll get the underlined squigglies for syntax errors, but I've turned off the completion features. I'm going to get the completion features from SQL Prompt. Okay, so now this is all reconfigured, looking real nice. So now I can say select, like so, dbo.employees, like this, come over here, and then go dot, pick a column, do my comma thing, come over here and do my employees again, like this, and so on. Go and get my last name, I think that's what I had next, comma, employees, dot, shift, tab, from employees, like so. Put in my semicolon. Okay, so that was really nice. So now I'm getting the best of both worlds in terms of the fact I'm getting my completion stuff from SQL Prompt, but I'm getting my error detection from IntelliSense, so that's pretty nice. However, I actually ended up doing more typing than I really wanted to, and I was missing a really nice feature that SQL Prompt gives us. And this is how I would actually normally write this query. I don't typically put the columns in first. I define the tables, the overall results that I want to get first. So I'm going to say select, space, from. Notice I didn't fill out the columns, and I'm going to get IntelliSense errors because I'm missing columns, but I don't care right now. So I'm going to say employees, like this, and then do a tab, and that's pretty nice. And then I'm going to say join, because I want to join it to the shifts table, like this. Oops, I did a space there by mistake. I wanted to get the shifts table, do a tab to do the completion, and then I do a join on spacebar. Notice what SQL Prompt did for me. It showed me the things I might want to join on. It saw that there was a foreign key relationship between the employees and the shifts table, and it said, you know, I'm guessing that's one of the things you're going to want to go and do your join on. It also noticed that they both had a column named ID. That's another possible candidate for doing a join. And then it showed all the other stuff. So I could do the join on anything I want, but noticed it pushed what is probably the most likely thing up to the top. So I can do my usual E thing, that picked that up, voila, I've got my join all set up, and it basically SQL Prompt looked at the stuff to give me things in order of probable usage in that list of choices that I had for completion. Now that I'm over here, I can start going and filling out things. I can say like first name. Notice what it did. It brought up at the top of the list were columns from the tables that are involved in the queries. And then all the other ones too, just in case I want to do something weird. So I can say, gee, I want to get the first name, I want to get the last name, and then what I want to do is get let's say what I want to get actually is the shift ID. That's what I did before. So I can type ID like this, and you'll notice, well, it says, you know, there's an ID in shifts, there's an ID employees, you know, you're going to have to tell me which one you want. In fact, that's a conflict in names, and that's going to cause a problem in our query if we don't clean it up. But let me go and hit a tab to put in int, and I want int from the shifts table. And notice what it did. It saw that there was in fact a collision between those two names. Both tables in the join had a column named ID. So I picked the one from shifts, and it put the multi-part name in for me automatically. I didn't have to do that. So this is the way I usually use SQL Prompt to write queries. I go and define the tables I'm going to work with, what I'm going to join up, the overall results that I want to get. And then I go and pick the columns afterwards because it tends to be a little bit easier to do. But you can do it either way. And the other, again, good thing is I still have all my good old IntelliSense stuff telling me with underlines if anything bad happened. Now there's yet one more thing I can do here. This is kind of all on one line. And if you notice, I have my keywords here in lowercase, and sometimes I do lowercase and sometimes I do uppercase. If you're working with T-SQL and only T-SQL all the time, you're probably used to having your keywords in uppercase. That's pretty typical. But if you're working with languages like C# and VB and occasionally writing SQL queries, you probably see the uppercase things as kind of yelling at you and you'd rather have them be lowercase. Well, in both SQL Server Management Studio and SQL Prompt, you can decide what sort of case you want for keywords. And right now we have SQL Prompt on, and if I go into SQL Prompt Options, you'll see down here I can define the case I want for different things, and I picked lowercase for everything. Turns out there's another thing I can do with SQL Prompt. If I go and highlight this line, I can come up to SQL Prompt and say Format SQL, or I can do Control-K, Control-Y. So let me do it from the keyboard. That's the most likely place you would do it. So I'll do Control-K, Control-Y, and now it's all been formatted so that it isn't all on a single line. And if it turned out I really wanted my keywords in uppercase, there's nothing to stop me from going down to my options, going down to case, and saying I want to have all the reserved words in uppercase. Coming back here, re-highlighting these things and saying Control-K, Control-Y, and voila, everything's, all the keywords, all the reserved words are shifted to uppercase for me. So this is one of the formatting features that are built into SQL Prompt. I'm going to put it back to lowercase because that's typically what I do for demos like this. But of course, you can have it any way you want. The other thing you can do with the format is you can decide how you want these things formatted. And you can see that's all down here. Schema statements look like this. Data statements look like this. So there's all kinds of things you can do to pick how you want things formatted. So this is a pretty good way because everything's on a line and it doesn't go off the edge of the screen. Okay, so we really looked at some of the key capabilities of the IntelliSense-like features of SQL Prompt. Now another thing that SQL Prompt has they call snippets. And snippets in SQL Prompt basically are very similar to the snippets in Visual Studio and actually very similar to the templates that are already built into SQL Server Management Studio. So they're just like snippets in Visual Studio and templates in Management Studio. And we can make use of these in various, they're all shortcut things. If I go up to SQL Prompt and I look in the Snippet Manager, you'll see all these possible snippets in here. You'll see like, here's a snippet to drop a table. And let me highlight it and you can see what it is. Right here it says drop table. That's really powerful. Let me just go and use it. The way I use it is just type, while it's looking up stuff, it's going to look up things that can possibly match that. And it turns out there is a snippet that will go and match that called drop table, and I can type it and put in drop table. Gee, that's really nice. So one of the things about the snippets in SQL Prompt, I mean, it's really nice that because the snippets allow you to drop code in line. And the template manager in Management Studio doesn't allow you to drop templates in line. It opens up a new query window. And if you really wanted it in line, you're going to have to copy paste after you fill out that template to go and put it back in line, which is kind of inconvenient. However, the templates that are in the Snippet Manager in SQL Prompt are not parameterized. The only parameter that you can have is this one right here that says cursor. It's where you want the cursor to end up after you've gone in and inserted that template. But you can't do things like say, I want the table name to go here and that sort of thing. So while the inline snippets are really handy, they really aren't as powerful as the templates that we have in Management Studio. For example, let's just go get one. I'll bring up the Template Explorer here, and let's go and use the drop table template. and get this out of the way. So this is our drop table template, and this is basically going and has the code to test to see if a table exists before it tries to drop it. And it won't drop it if it doesn't exist, and that'll prevent a spurious error from leaking out when you run this script. And to use this, you just go and click on either specify values for template parameters, or over to here to say specify values for template parameters, or Control-Shift-M. So we'll go over to this guy, and what it did is it went and looked inside of this template and saw that here's something called schema name. In fact, it happens to be in two places. Oops, didn't want to quite do that. I should say here's schema name in two places. It also spotted that table name was in a couple places like that. And what it's asking me to do is to put in the values I want to go and replace those with. So let's go and give it a try. I would, just to show how this works, so I'll come down here and fill out the name I want for that table. I'll call it, I should say the schema name, so I'll call it DBO. That's probably where it's going to end up. And I'll call it my table like this, and then a double enter, and voila, it filled it out for me. That's really nice, but it's not in line. So how can we get the features of both? Well, one of the important things about the Template Explorer is it's just a repository of templates. It doesn't do anything special once you've dropped the template in here. In fact, I could have typed that template into this query and gone and run this tool against it. And that's really the secret to how we're going to go and integrate templates into SQL Prompt. So let me go and bring up the Template Explorer again, like this, because I want to go and get this drop table template and just copy the whole thing like this. And we'll get this out of the way, and we'll get this out of the way because we don't care about that anymore. And okay, now we're back to here. Let me get this out of the way. We're not going to use this. I want to go up to SQL Prompt and Snippet Manager, and I want to add a new snippet. And I'm going to call it drop table X because it has extra stuff in it. And I'll call it drop table with params, like so. And I'm going to drop in that template that I took from the Template Explorer, like this. Cool. Okay. So now if I want to use that, I can type DTX, X, and then type a tab or a carriage return, and it inserts it. Okay, at this point, what can I do? Well, again, the Template Explorer is unrelated to this function over here that fills out values for template parameters. So I can drop that in, hit this, and do exactly what I did before. I think I said DBO, my table, like so, and then do another carriage return. And now I'm able to use parameterized templates in SQL Prompt. So this is giving me the best of both worlds. The parameterized templates in SQL Server Management Studio are really powerful, and the ability to drop snippets in line in SQL Prompt is very powerful, and this combines the two of them. So we've seen that to integrate SQL Prompt with Management Studio and get the best features of both, we want to configure SQL Prompt to use the dot and the comma characters as completion characters, and we want to configure IntelliSense so it doesn't do command completion, so that we can let SQL Prompt do that. And when we write queries with SQL Prompt, it's usually best to define the tables and the joins in the query first, and then define the columns afterwards, because SQL Prompt will give us a lot of information about relationships between the tables in our query. And when we create SQL Prompt snippets, we can use the parameterized template format that we have in the Template Explorer in Management Studio and still make use of the fill-in parameter values functions in SQL Server Management Studio, so we get the goodness of being able to drop snippets in line but end up with parameterized snippets. And that brings us to the end of this screencast on integrating Redgate's SQL Prompt into SQL Server Management Studio.